Hello, everyone. This is Eric Diaz. Thank you for joining us with CIS 103. I'm really excited today and I think we're very blessed to have a speaker from a sports team today. So I'm really happy to welcome Jess Isner from the New York Rangers to talk a little bit about what it's like to be in social media for a sports team. Jess, thank you for being part of it.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
So let me give a quick introduction to Jess and what she does. The session today with Jess will analyze her experience working in social and digital for the New York Rangers of the NHL. Jess manages the Rangers' public-facing digital and social presence across Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. She concepts, develops, and implements content strategy across the brand's social platforms in alignment with the club's brand campaign and growth objectives. Jess always also provides real-time social coverage of all on-ice and off-ice activities in the always-on capacity across the brand's social platforms. So Jess, I know we've got you just for a little bit. You've got a game starting in an hour. So I guess let's just jump right into it. If you would, just tell us what's an average day for you, which you could just tell us, what's your working day like today, for example.
Yeah, so today is a game day, obviously. So the day starts around 8 a.m. with our first post of the day, usually just setting the scene for our game day. Most game days, we have a morning skate, which is basically like just a practice. And because my role is supposed to be embedded with the team, normally wherever they are, I am. So on a normal game day, I would go to our training center, cover that live, just share a couple short clips across our channels, kind of showing our players getting ready for the game. We'll then have media availability, which we'll share in full across our channels as well. In between all that, we have a lot of sponsored content every game day that needs to get out. That takes up probably more of our feed than we would like every game day, but I guess it's a good problem to have. And once we get closer to the game window, there's kind of like a little bit of a formula to hockey social, at least. Like most teams provide arrival photos. Our fans like to see players kind of showing their personality through their fashion. So that's something that we always make sure to get out. We'll sometimes show them warming up in the hallways or playing soccer. A lot of teams have guys that do that. And again, just kind of showing our fans more of the kind of nuance and personality behind players that are usually masked and kind of hard to identify on the ice. So the whole time we're kind of just trying to provide an inside lens that helps our fans have something that they can identify with. And even during the game, I would say that's our strategy as well. Like today, you'll see us post a lot of clips of guys interacting with one another, with fans, showing excitement, showing emotion, and all of that is kind of with the intention of kind of bringing some humanity to a sport that is kind of hard to decipher just from watching it on TV or, watching highlights. So once our game starts around 7 o'clock, I'll usually be on ice level. I'll sometimes shoot a little bit with my phone, but I'll be ingesting a lot of clips from our shooter editors and photographers stationed kind of throughout the arena. Post as much of that in real time as humanly possible. And then after the game, kind of back to the formula of, sharing media availabilities. If we win, again, we'll kind of go back to that strategy of really emphasizing our players' personalities through their celebrations with each other, with the fans. And then it's a wrap, usually around 11 or 12.
Wow, that's a long day. Is that every day or just game days are a little bit special?
It's definitely an always on job, no matter if it's a game day or not. Like there's always something that comes up, even if it's not a game day. So I am always attached to my phone. And if I'm not, I'm panicking. But it comes with the territory.
So a lot of the students submitted, they're very interested in like your background. I will share that generally the majority of 75% or more of my students tend to be women. So I think for them, it's really inspiring to see you working in professional sports. So I'd love to know more about like how you got into it. Rosemary from the class, she asked a question. Have you always been a sports enthusiast? Do you believe that is a benefit for your line of work? What do you enjoy most about your line of work?
Yeah, it's a good question. I would say I definitely have always been a big sports fan. I actually was just talking to my coworkers earlier tonight about how when I was growing up, I was a huge college basketball fan, and I used to go to every Boston College basketball game all season, and that kind of was what stoked my fandom and made me passionate about just sports in general. And I think from there, I just always I always kind of found something on the teams that I love to like personally identify with, which is kind of something I believe strongly in, that like when we're creating content, what we're trying to do is give the people that we're speaking to something that resonates with them on an emotional level, because that's what kind of creates the connection that leads to fandom. But yes, to answer the question, I was always a sports fan. I think there were two more parts to the question that I now forget.
Basically, I guess what's your favorite part of the job? Was something else?
I think my favorite part of the job is, I think, a lot of us who work in sports are just super lucky to get to come to work every day doing something that we love. Like a lot of my friends will say things to me like, I can't believe your job is to like go to a hockey game or go to a practice. And I believe that like it's definitely a blessing to, feel passionate about your work, because if you love your work, you'll never work a day in your life, which is great. But I think just, feeling like every day when I get up, I have, something exciting to look forward to, something that I love doing. I feel like when you love what your job is, you're also probably better at your job. And so I think that's, something that I enjoy as well. So I would say that, yeah, like it's not every day you kind of end up doing something that you dream of doing or foresee yourself doing. And I'm definitely in a fortunate position to be doing that.
Very good, very good. So Rosemary asked another question. It's kind of the opposite, asking like maybe about the tricky parts, the hard parts. So she said she read your background, understand that you produce content for the Rangers, work hand in hand with the players to develop their own personal brand as well. Is any of this tricky at times, or how do you keep everything balanced?
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple elements of that are tricky. I think one of them is just like you said, balance is sort of hard to come by in this job. Like we talked about, it takes up a lot of your time, not just in like the 9 to 5 hours, it takes up a lot of your personal time as well. So you kind of, going back to Rosemary's earlier question, like you definitely have to be passionate about it in order to dedicate that much of yourself to it. So that can be, a difficult transition for your first sports job. But like I said, if you have that passion for it, it's definitely way easier. I think like another tricky thing just about social is that everyone tends to have opinions on it, because you have a personal Twitter, Instagram, whatever, like you think social strategy, and there's probably a lot more to it than what the average person just posts day to day. And that's just challenging, because there tends to be a lot of opinions and cooks in the kitchen when you're trying to justify why you do or don't do something, when you're trying to justify your strategy. But I think just making sure that your thoughts are grounded in principles that are solid and stand in fact, helps make it easier to justify what you're doing. And being a self learner is also super helpful, making sure you're staying up to date on the newest best practices, the newest platforms, the newest features of all the platforms, and yeah, just trying to like stay focused on you and tune out the noise, I think helps mitigate some of those issues.
A couple of the students had questions about the platforms themselves. So I want to ask a little bit more about that. On your bio, it mentions you manage Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. So some of the folks were asking about like, how do you manage the different platforms? Do you post the same content, or is it different? Can you tell us a little bit more about the strategy between the 3 platforms?
Yeah, for sure. So it's a great question. I would say probably 75% of the content is consistent across the 3 platforms. I would say that the thing we do differently is the way that we message to our audience is different across the 3, just because the audiences that we have on each of the platforms are very different from one another. So for example, like our Twitter audience is where we know our most diehard fans live. So we are probably going to talk like the nuts and bolts of the game more there than we would on Instagram, which is a much more casual fan, someone that's probably engaging because they feel like an emotional spark or an emotional tie to whatever the content is. So whereas on Twitter, a lot of the time our intention is just to inform maybe rather than engage. Like our intention on Instagram is always to engage no matter what. So that helps us decide whether something might be a fit for Twitter that isn't for Instagram. Like this isn't going to get someone to feel happy, feel sad, feel something. It probably doesn't belong on that platform. And Facebook is just tough because I feel like for most brands, it's probably somewhere where most of us are hemorrhaging followers more so than gaining them. So if anything, we're all just trying to stay stagnant. So I would say most of what we do there is a reflection of what we're sharing on Twitter, with the exception of like there's a lot of research about how Facebook is the best place to host long form content and kind of community driven content. So there's definitely more of an emphasis on that there than on the other two.
And you said, did you say 75% of the content is similar between the three? Is that right?
I would say, yeah. Yeah. And I would say like when we're creating, we are probably most of the time creating for Instagram rather than any other platform, just because like the way that we quantify our success, engagements on Instagram are the most important for us. Like they basically, it's like if everything has like a dollar value, like Instagram is worth $5 and Twitter is worth $1 in terms of engagement. So, you know, if we're gonna share something on Instagram that's gonna generate max engagement, it's probably also gonna generate max engagement on the other platforms, but also kind of get us to our bottom line faster.
Got it. Two follow-up questions. So tell me a little bit more about like what are the main metrics for you guys? And are they different between the different platforms?
So I wouldn't say they're different between the different platforms, but for us, they tend to be different year over year. At the beginning of every fiscal year, because MSG is like a very corporate culture, like we, just like the ticket sales team has to quantify its success, like the social team does the same thing, just with different variables. So at the beginning of every fiscal year, we kind of set a blueprint for ourselves in terms of what we want to achieve. Last year, our main indicator of success was average engagement rate. And so that was what we were targeting. Every single week, we would run an analysis on our content. We would track how close we were to that year-end goal. We got there eventually. This year, we made a shift to value follower growth as our main KPI. And that's because, you know, our mission for the next 5 years is just to grow our audience as much as possible, because that, you know, has that helps you succeed across the business. You know, you're creating more potential for ticket sales, creating more potential for merch sales, creating more lifelong fans, especially when we're targeting, you know, a younger demographic. We're trying to create people who are going to be helping us succeed for years and years to come. So right now, that's our main driver. We actually just hit our year-end goal a couple of weeks ago, which is super early, but also really exciting because it means we're doing something right. And we have lots of room. Thank you. We have lots of room left to grow. But yeah, I mean, it's good. I've worked at places where we don't necessarily like set the same, you know, parameters for ourselves. And I feel like it leaves you a little bit like rudderless in terms of what you're trying to achieve. So I think for me, even like I'm a very competitive person by nature, and it helps me keep myself on track, like week over week. If, you know, our numbers are lagging, I'm like, okay, what can we do differently to make sure we're back on track the next week?
Question for you. You don't have to go into all the details on this, but I was just curious, just so like for layman's explanation of valued follower growth, could you explain that a little bit more?
Of what? I'm sorry.
The valued follower growth, like your main metric. Like how do you measure that, I guess?
So we have a pretty robust analytics department here, and they like very carefully track every single week how much we have grown across all of our platforms. Most of the platforms are pretty transparent with like allowing the account owner to see that. And even there are some platforms that allow you to see like how other similar brands are growing as well. So it's something that we just carefully track, and like it's hard to say, you know, this piece of content was responsible for this spike in follower growth. That's not something that the platforms are sophisticated enough to do, but it's usually pretty easy to kind of deduce by yourself where the growth is coming from, and then decide like where do you want to kind of funnel your resources to make sure you're producing more of that. So that, yeah, like we just track it carefully manually every week. It's not something that like a system can do for us. And, we've been tracking it for so long at this point. We have years and years of data we can refer back to. And I mean, there's so much value in having a large following, probably primarily just for partnership purposes. Like any brand who wants to work with us wants as many eyes on their content as possible. So if we can go to them and say, hey, we have the 7th largest following in the entire NHL, it's probably going to work out pretty well for us in terms of getting them to sign on, because they know, we're going to get a very engaged, large audience's eyes on our content.
Is that what you guys have, the 7th largest following?
We do. We want to be number 1, but we got some ground to make up.
Well, that's great. Who is number 1?
I think number 1 is, I want to say it's Chicago, maybe, or one of the Canadian teams, maybe Montreal. I forget. But those, it's like the same 7 teams always battling for ground.
I wanted to allow Dee from our class she had a couple questions. And Dee, if you want to join on and ask those, it'd be great.
Hi.
Hi.
My first question is, what are the innovative ways that you are using to keep the fans engaged on social media?
It's a great question. And it's honestly always something we are testing and learning from week after week. Like right now, I would say the biggest innovation tool that we have is just TikTok as a platform. I think the way brands have been using TikTok over the last probably 18 months or so has really evolved to a point where it's become something super valuable. And for us, especially with what I just talked about with follower growth, like the vast majority of our follower growth comes from that platform because it's the newest and has first of all, it has the biggest potential for virality. And secondly, it is geared toward that exact age demographic that we want to access. So for now, I think that's kind of where we're putting all of our eggs in terms of trying to innovate, trying to create specifically for that platform, trying to involve influencers that are going to help us reach an even wider audience than we might be able to by ourselves. But I think one of the best things about social is that it's so ever changing and so constantly evolving that what I say is innovative today might be dead by tomorrow, and there could be something new. So like so much of the job is just about kind of staying on top of trends and features and platforms and making sure that you always know kind of what the next biggest thing is to do before it's too late.
Okay, thank you. So my second question is, what are the things that you can share and what you cannot share, or you avoid sharing on your social media platforms?
Yeah, that's also a really good question. It differs so much, honestly. Like for our brand currently, we're pretty conservative in terms of what we share. Like you see a lot of teams, especially in the NHL space, that are very flippant with the way that they post. Their tone is like very almost like man on the street, like a little, I don't know another word other than flippant to say it, but it's just like almost like the everyman, but in a way that, our marketing team is a little uncomfortable with. So we actually, over the summer, we did an exercise where we basically created like a personality to live behind our brand, and we like gave it a name and gave it an identity and gave it, characteristics that we could always refer back to help guide us in the way that we communicated. Like it's a lot harder to see something or hear something and think to yourself, like, is this okay to post, without having an idea of what's okay that's grounded in reality. So the whole idea is like, we now have this person who we can then think, would this person say that, or would this person do that? And it makes it a lot easier to kind of use your judgment in the moment about what's okay and what's not. But honestly, it's hard. I mean, I have questions every day about whether something's okay, but fortunately I have, teammates and managers that can help me, with their judgment when I might fear that mine is not good enough. But it is definitely a challenge.
Thank you. My last question is, like, based on your experience, what is the best way to react on like negative comments?
Oh, that's also a good question. I think it depends. My personal philosophy is to ignore it. I think especially on the internet, like trolls want attention. So anytime you're giving it to them, they're winning. Like as a brand, we don't really respond to negativity. We don't engage with it. There are a lot of brands that do, and I'm sure that they have reasons for it. But for us, we'd rather just not draw more attention to it by potentially putting it in the line of sight of the 3 million people who follow us. So
you don't
we try
delete
to.
them? No.
There's only a couple of the platforms allow that. Like Twitter, you can't delete negative comments, which is challenging. Instagram, you can, and yeah, like we actually have a service that like we give them a list of keywords, and they, using a combination of AI and people, like filter out anything that violates like the standards that we've set. So we don't have a ton of stuff that needs to be deleted, except on Twitter where you can't delete it. So there, our strategy is kind of just to ignore it.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Of course.
All right, I've got a few more questions from the students about kind of general social media, and then we'll wrap it up just with just some like final career advice that you might have. All right,
Sure.
so a couple other questions. Hashtags. Any suggestion on like how many hashtags you should use, and do you use them on all platforms or no?
This is a great conversation because it's always something that people have very different opinions on. I think like hashtags are probably like a little overused, just because the point of them in general is to create something for like your entire community to rally around and start using themselves. So you should really only be using them when whatever you're hashtagging like has the potential to do that. So like, for example, for us, when we like retired the jersey of an iconic player, and it was a month-long campaign that was going to generate tons of content, like for us, that warranted creating a custom hashtag. And it did end up being something that, our community organically caught on to and began using themselves. If you are using a hashtag to like some people will use a hashtag after a post to like express a sentiment, or like winning, like YOLO, like stuff like that. That probably is like not where I would use one, just because I think like the usage has probably evolved past the point where that's, something that's useful to a brand, like maybe for personal social media use, but not for a brand. And in addition to that, just anything that doesn't have a long shelf life. Like a lot of times I get asked, is there a hashtag for casino night? Is there a hashtag for opening night? And I'm like, well, casino night and opening night are 24 hours, and there's not a lot of build up to them. There's not a lot of content that we're sharing to lead up to them. There's not enough time for us to familiarize our audience with this and get them accustomed to using this hashtag on their own. So like that use case probably is not a great one for using one, but it's so subjective, and so many different people have different philosophies on them.
Totally. You mentioned a software platform or a tool that you guys may use to find negative comments and moderate them, delete them, things like that. Can you tell us about any other tools that you guys use?
Sure. So in addition to that one, we use like a community management / analytics tool called Sprout that is super useful for organizing your content by subject, being able to quantify, by subject, what worked and what didn't. You kind of go in and manually tag each post, and then you're able to sort your content accordingly and really easily be able to see, are things working? Are things performing to benchmark? Is this entire series flopping? Is it succeeding? So that's super helpful just for quick analysis. And then our more robust analytics team relies on that pretty heavily for campaign tracking, and then overall, campaign ending reporting, year-end reporting. So that's super helpful. Other than that, we don't use a ton of outsourced tools. Like the platforms are so great these days about providing, what you need to use to succeed on them just inherently in the platforms themselves. So like we definitely bring on, vendors and tools as we need them. Like we used to use a tool called Slate which allowed us to heavily customize the content we were sharing on Instagram story. And it was great for Instagram story, but Instagram story then ended up being something that was not, like, we couldn't really monetize it because the shelf life of the content is so short. It's hard to record impressions for partners. It's really difficult to like grow your audience off of posting on Instagram story because there's not an inherent mechanism for like sharing that with anyone else that's not already following you. So those are the kinds of tools where like we try them out and then we kind of decide they're not really adding to our bottom line, so we may decide to lose them in the end. But like, I'm sure something will happen in the next 6 months that will be like, oh, we need a new tool for this, we need help with this. So there's so much out there, which is awesome.
That's great. What was the name of the tool, the AI tool that moderates comments and stuff?
That one is, I was just emailing with them earlier today.
No worries if you don't have it. I was just curious.
No, I literally was just emailing with them. Hold on one sec. It's called Respondology.
Oh, cool. Okay.
It's very helpful.
And then another question I had. So another kind of general social media question. So Michelle asked, as someone who manages the Rangers social media platforms, what do you think is appropriate amount of times a brand, company? So she's kind of asking in general, like, how do you determine how often you should post per week?
It definitely varies, I think. Like, so a couple examples, we have a completely different set of metrics in the off season than we do in season with regards to like how much volume we're expected to share on our channels. And the reasoning behind that is like there are certain times of the calendar year where our audience is expecting to see max content, and there are certain times where they're expecting not to see it. And the last thing we want is to be sharing so much content that it results in people unfollowing us because it's too much. So it's situational, and like so much of social media is just, judging a situation in real time, reading the room, analyzing content in real time to see if it's resonating. And that remains true like all the time. For us, we post probably about 200 times a week across the platforms that I manage. But there have been situations where we maximize that. Like, for example, the jersey retirement I mentioned earlier. Our strategy was basically to try not to think about how much posting was appropriate and try to maximize a time when the most eyes were going to be on our channels and the most people were going to be engaging. We ended up posting as much in that one day as we normally would in a full week. And our engagement rate actually was higher during that day than our benchmark, which means it was a success. So I think, like I said earlier, in this chat, like so much of social is just situational awareness and testing and learning and figuring out if things are working or not and reacting to that in the moment. So that's like, if you're ever managing a brand account, like that's probably what I would say is just test, see after a week what's working and what's not, adjust, do that again after a week, adjust again, and then keep doing that until you kind of figure out the right cadence.
Very good. All right, and then I want to just transition. Last few questions will just be about kind of like your career and like where you're going, what's next for you, things like that. So yeah, one of the students asked, what is next for you? Where do you want to go in your marketing and communications career?
I don't know. I am pretty content where I am right now. And like I said, like social is such a ever evolving and changing space that it's hard for me to see a time when like it doesn't interest me and doesn't stay something I want to be engaged with. Like it's hard to become kind of stale or bored in the world of social just because there's always more to learn. There's always something new to explore. And that's, the great thing about it. It's not something you're ever going to get bored doing. So, and I also just feel super passionate about it and I enjoy it. I love using it myself. I love using it to communicate with our fans. So I think like this is kind of the space that I would like to stay in. I don't think I'll forever be like managing the brand channels. Like I think eventually there's a time where hopefully I move into more of a, strategic role instead of a tactical role. where maybe like I'm overseeing the people who are managing the accounts, and instead I'm dictating the strategy a little bit more. So I think that's probably where I see my path going most immediately.
Very good. How has working with a well-known brand affected your career?
I mean, it's been awesome. Like I mean, the Rangers, this is my third sports team I've worked with, and the fourth sports brand I've worked with, and it's definitely been my favorite for a number of reasons. Obviously, not everyone is super familiar with the NHL and hockey, but most people are familiar with the Rangers, and if not the Rangers, Madison Square Garden. So that just in itself like opens up so many doors for me. Like I've gotten to meet so many people and network with so many people through this job that I'm so grateful for. Like I think in this industry in general, like so much of it is about making connections, and I don't say that meaning like just kind of cold email everyone you can find and try to get them in your network, but like it's great for making authentic connections with people, and finding a mentor, finding somebody who can really be value additive to your career, and fostering like an authentic relationship with them. And like I've met so many people who I've been fortunate enough to be mentored by, and like hopefully down the line like I can return the favor to others. But I think like a lot of kind of the exposure and the experiences I've gotten to have are because of the iconic nature of the brand that I work for, and that's definitely something that I'm super grateful for.
Very good. All right, last two questions. So for our students, a lot of them are pursuing an associate's degree, and they're going to transfer to, a lot of them will transfer to Arizona State and finish degrees. What type of, when they're looking for their first jobs, what type of professional and personal skills does it take to succeed at the type of work you do?
I would say number one is just general writing skills are so important, not just for this job, but probably for any job. And it's always amazing to me how I feel like the emphasis on writing skills has really disappeared a little bit. Even like when I was in college, I felt that way. And then when I got out, I was so grateful that it was something that I, studied and really prioritized, because no matter what you're doing, you're always going to need to be able to write an email that's well written and clear and concise. Like you're always going to need to, give presentations or speak to a room. And so those skills are so widely applicable beyond just, the traditional communications fields or, certainly social media jobs. So I would say that is skill number one, is just being able to write clearly and concisely. I would say for me, like the thing I always look for when I'm, hiring people is a super finite attention to detail. I think that's pretty particular to the world of social, but so much of what we do is happening not only in real time, but on a timer. And being fast is super, super significant for us. And, being fast means nothing if you're not correct as well. So I always look to hire people who, can craft copy quickly and correctly, who, can read over their own work and spot a mistake, who can, look at someone else's work and, improve it. Just, really being able to zero in on small details consistently is definitely a must-have for this line of work.
Perfect. All right. Final question. Any final tips you would give to our students as they finish up their careers and go looking for their first jobs in the workforce?
I would say a couple things. I would say, like I mentioned, I think, relationships that you make are so important, especially in this field. So I would, not be afraid to reach out to people. I think another thing that's great about this field is that most people in it probably have gotten to where they are because someone did them a favor or answered an email or, gave them an informational interview at some point when they needed one. And so I think a lot of us similarly are willing to return the favor. So I would just say be liberal with your willingness to reach out to people. Don't be afraid of a no. They're going to happen. It's unavoidable, but don't let that kind of dissuade you from, being aggressive to a point about making connections and authentic connections and trying to build a network. Like for a long time, I think I was so scared to reach out to people because I was worried I was bothering them or they were going to say no. And I think the sooner you get over that and just realize like everyone for the most part is a good person that's willing to do someone else a favor, the better off you'll be. And then I would say like, just think about careers and subjects and duties that like genuinely excite you. Like we're all going to be working a long time and it's going to be a lot longer if you don't like what you're doing. So the better that you can kind of position yourself to be doing something that you genuinely care about, you know, the more effective you're going to be as an employee and like in your career. Like I very strongly believe that like the people who are best at their jobs are people who their work doesn't really feel like work to them. It's just something they enjoy and want to be doing. So if you can kind of get yourself in a situation where that's, you know, your day to day, I think it'll be, you know, super beneficial to you.
Excellent. Jess, really appreciate your time today. This was so helpful and the students are going to love it. And
Good.
anyway, I just really appreciate you taking an hour out of your day, and you know, I hope you guys good luck against the Bruins tonight. I know you guys will do well.
Thank you. Are you sure I answered all your questions? I know we cut off
yeah,
short.
you did. You gave
Okay,
us
good.
so much content to think about. So thank you so much.
Good. Well, I'm glad. Thank you for having me. I hope it's helpful, and it was so nice to meet you.
Yeah, you as well. All right. Have a great rest of the week. Good luck.
Thank you. You too. Bye.
Bye.